Welcome. Today is day 5,892 that Boswell's been here and been in business. Thank you. And I'm excited to spend it with Rickey Fayne. So welcome. He is an author whose writing has appeared in the New York Times, American Short Fiction, the Kenyon Review, and you can go online and see the rest of the list. It's a lot of very impressive publications. He earned his MA in English at Northwestern. He did his MFA in fiction at the University of Texas, currently teaches that away at UW-Madison, and he is here tonight with his novel, The Devil Three Times. This book is incredible. It's gotten some great reviews, and it is a strong, strong competitor for my favorite book of the year. The year's not over yet, but strong, strong competitor. So I'm going to read you just a couple excerpts from my little staff recommendation. We'll make it personal this evening. But as I wrote, by 4 pages into this book, and I think we'll get convince Rickey to read a few of those pages. I was thinking this guy's a genius. It is truly remarkable to me how Fayne captures Southern storytelling traditions on the page, telling the story of one person, weaving through the lives and the highs and lows of every other person they've ever met. He weaves crooked spirals through all these lives as he tells the story of generations. The book begins with an enslaved woman who makes a deal with the devil, and the book is so good, I wondered by the end if Rickey Fayne didn't also make a deal with the devil. It's a good title for the shtick is good. So welcome. Give him a round of applause, will you?
Oh, thank you.
Um, before I know I'm going to ask you to read a little bit from the novel, that'd be great. But before, I always like to start with, just in case anyone's unfamiliar with the book, doesn't know anything, would you mind the elevator pitch? And we have some time, so this can be the stuck on the elevator pitch if you want.
Sure, yeah. So I guess elevator pitch for this book. So it's about 7 or 8 generations of a Southern Black family who is, I was saying at first haunted by the devil, but the devil more so guides them, right? So he sort of appears in moments of crisis and sort of does what looks like the wrong thing to them in order for them to get the right thing done later, right? So as Zora Hurston would say, is using a crooked stick to hit a straight lick, right? So it's just following this family. And one of the things that was important to me as I was writing it was the idea that I wanted sort of all of them to be able to tell their own story in their own voice, sort of just like fully immersed in their own. So yeah, and I guess the parts you were talking about at the beginning, those that sort of frames their narrative. So we see the devil again and again as he's sort of like trying to, I guess, win his way back into heaven or find his way back into heaven, and we just sort of see his adventures throughout history and like lesser known pockets of history.
Yeah, the devil's voice is so fun and so great in this book. It's really powerful. I want to ask before you read too, is Hurston a big influence? Because your descriptions of the place, like they ring back to some of her novels. As I was reading this, I was noting, but at the same time, I mean, you're both just really accurately describing place. So
Yeah, I mean, so I feel like Hurston was There Is a Watching God was like the first book for me where I was just like, oh man, like I didn't know that the way that like my parents and grandparents talk could be literature and poetry, right? So I feel
yeah,
like the voice of her book sort of like freed me up to explore the poetry of the language I heard every day, right? So that's where the inspiration from Zora comes from. So I'm
absolutely.
always grateful
Yeah.
to her for opening my eyes to that in a way that I don't know would have been if I hadn't read her.
You're gonna make me reread that book. I haven't read it in like 15 years, so I'm going back now. Yeah, just speaking of the voice, do you want to read a passage from the
Sure.
book
Yeah.
and give us the voice of the book?
I'll read the prologue and I'll say a little bit too about the voice. Of course, Zora is an influence, but maybe a bigger one was my dad. He was a great oral storyteller. And he would always tell these stories like, you ever lived through something with someone and then they tell the story to other people and you're just like, oh, wow, that was so cool. Like, when did that happen? Right. He was one of those people where he could like make everything sound interesting. So this is me trying to do a little bit in writing what I felt like he was doing every day.
Fantastic.
In the beginning was the Word, but before the Word spoke, there was the devil. And he was hell bent on sowing unrest and upheaval amongst the angels in heaven. You see, the devil loved nothing so much as stirring shit up. inciting seraphim to fisticuffs. Jophiel and Michael all but threw hands when the devil doused the former's flaming sword and blamed the latter, and, worst of all, confounding that tall, not terribly bright Archangel Gabriel's mind with questions like, how does God expect us to reconcile free will with providence divine? Now, when God heard that, he said, now, devil, I done put up with your foolishness long enough. And before the devil could plead his case, God stomped his right foot, parted the clouds, and like a storm from paradise, the devil rained down. The devil sat there on the cold, dark earth with his head hung low, powerful, lonesome. And when God said, let there be light, he hid in the shadows. From there, he tempted Eve with his serpent, loosed Cain on Abel, and taught Noah how to drink and get naked. Now, Noah's folks like the devil, and the devil like Noah's folks. Anybody who can hold their liquor and keep their lies straight is never long in wanting friends. But he couldn't joke with Noah's folks like he could angels. They didn't banter, trade tall tales, kid, or have wolf tickets for sale. I mean, it was sad. Those poor folks couldn't cut the monkey if it held the knife for them. Case in point, one day the devil greeted Ham by asking him how he got to be so high on the hog, live so large. But Noah's son couldn't pick up what the devil put down. Just stood there as blank-faced and bewildered as the day he caught an eye full of his daddy's manhood. And so though it pained his conscience, the devil had no choice but to trick Nimrod, Ham's grandson, into getting him home. You see, Nimrod claimed his might rivaled God's, ruled according to a merciless code. Nimrod's people couldn't do nothing without Nimrod's say-so. All the devil had to do to trick Nimrod was testify to all the ways God flouted his laws. God's crimes were as numerous as they were inimical, being everywhere and nowhere all at once, working in ways mysterious, and bringing the world into being without Nimrod's input. Who gave God leave to make the earth and the heavens? Nimrod certainly hadn't sanctioned it. What was more, the devil said, pacing back and forth in front of the court, the great maker added insult to injury by failing to present himself to Nimrod, stand trial, and account for his many offenses. How could Nimrod abide such impertinence unless, and here the devil paused for dramatic effect, could it be Nimrod was not as powerful as he led folks to believe? Was the only power Nimrod had over the people the power the people conceded? All at once the people turned to Nimrod, considering, how bad was this man really? Already they were plotting. Already they were scheming. Nimrod could feel it. His iron grip was slipping. Nimrod's only hope was to string his bow to back his boast, fire arrows into heaven and hit something, anything celestial. I'm no expert on the science of it, the devil said, but you might have a better shot at God if you aim from higher up. What if you built a tower? That just might be the best idea anyone's ever had, Nimrod said, seeing at once the project's potential to unite the populace and divert attention from his gross incompetence. The devil could hardly believe folks had let someone so self-interested lead them. No matter, once he climbed the Tower of Babel and spread his wings, he would be home, free of these terrible people. Just as the devil was in spitting distance of the pearly gates, though, God wrinkled his nose, confounded all the bricklayers, reached out from the clouds and flicked the tower down. The devil kicked around for a while after that, propping up empires and watching them fall, making waves wherever he found calm. Before long, he heard tell of God sending down his only son, which hurt the devil's feelings because even though they butted heads now and then, the devil always thought of himself as God's own. But he didn't harp on God counting him out and was ready to forgive his father's every trespass if only he could just get back home. And so the devil set out to find Jesus, God's favorite son, and caught up to him in the wilderness, hunting up four-leaf clovers, worrying the manes off dandelions, and watching the wind blow clouds about. The devil spent 40 days and 40 nights trying to reason with Jesus, brother to brother. Jesus, the devil said, I'm not evil, not really. How could I be? Ain't nothing in me God ain't put there. Ain't a thing in my heart God didn't smile upon. All I want is to get back home. When Jesus heard the devil's words, he wept. Because you know Jesus real soft-hearted, especially when it comes to fathers not doing right by their sons. Jesus himself didn't hear from his real daddy until he was damn near 31. Jesus said, devil, you really have touched me. My wings ain't strong enough to fly us both up to heaven, but if you can hold out just a little bit longer, I'll bend God's ear and see if we can't work out something. And so the devil bided his time for a few more eons, making bargains here, turning a soul or two away from God, but his heart wasn't ever really in it. When he just about lost all faith in Jesus, Jesus came to the devil in a dream. I've been working overtime on God, Jesus said, and still he ain't budged. I'll keep after it, but in the meantime, I need you to help me. You heard about what's happening in Africa? The devil said he hadn't. Jesus said they're robbing up black folks from there and working them to death in America. Huh, the devil said, ain't that something? But he was only half listening. No human suffering could rival his own. All the devil took from Jesus' words was that Jesus had yet to find him a way home. Jesus hauled off and backhanded the poor devil. Blap. Listen to me, Jesus said. It is something, and you the somebody who needs to fix it. Ain't that God's problem? The devil asked, trying to rub some feeling back into his cheek, wondering what on earth had turned his sweet baby brother so evil mean. You think, Jesus huffed, but he's up in heaven twiddling his thumbs. Says all humans are one race, acting like he can't see color from his gold throne. The devil was struck dumb. He ain't never once in his life imagined Jesus would fix his mouth to talk wet about God. And if you were struck too, then the joke's on you. Because if ain't but one thing in this world true, it's that Jesus loves him some black folks and black folks love them some Jesus. It's like they're the hand and he's the thumb, and he gets powerful angry when he sees them done wrong. Go south, Jesus told the devil. Free my people and watch out for them until I return. You do this, and I promise that one day I'll find a way to get you home. And when the devil woke, that's just what he did and is even now still trying to do. That's why black people have to go through hell to get free. And how come to this day the devil won't leave them be?
Thanks for that. I mean, you see what he just did. He just gave you the whole Bible in 3.5 pages. Like, come on, man. When you were reading that, something jumped out at me, and it comes up again in the book, that thought of free will versus providence divine. Is this book you're wrestling with that?
Yeah,
A
I mean,
little?
I feel like that's a big question for
Yeah.
me.
I didn't figure it was a yes or no. I thought there might be a little.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's I don't know. I feel like I always had, I grew up in the church, which is where all this biblical stuff comes from. Um, but I always wondered that. I mean, like if everything's sort of set forth in divine providence, what agency do we have
Yeah,
as individuals, right? But also too, I feel like a bigger question for me is like what is freedom, right? It's this thing that we're taught to sort of put on this pedestal and say a lot of words about, but I don't know that it really gets interrogated all that much, or if it's a concept that's still useful for us as a society, right? Because I feel like we've taken this definition of freedom to mean like I get to do whatever I want, and if you're standing in my way, then you're a
right.
problem, right? But I feel like for me, I think this idea of just being this agent in the world that doesn't have to really account for anybody else, it's not helpful, and it's not what the human race I feel like was. That's not what we were built for, right? We were built helping each other. So, and even when you have someone that says like, "Oh, I did all this myself," right? I made this. It That wasn't the case. Like there were people along the way who did things for you and who showed up for you, right? And so I think the question is not whether or not you're free, but who or what you choose to belong to, right? Like if you belong to your loved ones, your family and friends, that's one thing, right? Or if you
Mhm.
belong, or you feel like you belong to, the pursuit of happiness, parentheses, property, right? Then
Right.
that's something else.
Yeah. So why the devil then?
Well, I feel like, if there's hope for the devil,
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
there's hope for everybody, right? I mean, I feel like I don't know. I feel like when I was a kid, because of how the devil was talked about in church, these weren't, I feel like the way figures were talked about in church when I was growing up is like they were still out there in the world. This wasn't like something that was over. Like I had this sense that like one day I would turn the corner and the devil was gonna like offer me something for my soul that I couldn't refuse. And I was like
Right.
already ashamed of the fact that I gave in like before it happened. Right.
You were looking for the
Yeah,
crossroads.
I was like,
Yeah.
well, I mean, I would be nice to to have that, but I mean, I don't know. What is my soul anyway, really? But but I feel like that fear, but also that sense of like living in this sort of like dynamic world where things weren't sort of sealed off in this way was really interesting to me. So I kind of wanted to bring that alive in this book.
Yeah, I love the way this world kind of touches other worlds throughout the book and throughout the century. Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
Speaking too about kind of thinking about that sense of community, that sense of oneness. What I love, and we were talking a little bit earlier about this, one thing I just love about this book is the way you've captured a certain style of Southern storytelling. I grew up in West Virginia, so further east, but kind of not too far off
Yeah,
that
we're
parallel
there
there.
together.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, not too
Yeah.
far off that parallel. And what I love is how you've captured the way that telling the story of one person isn't just telling the story of one person, it's telling the story of a community. It's telling the story, I think, as I put it to you, like to tell one person's story, you got to tell the high, the low, the everything of every person that person knew. How did you try and capture that? Why was that important to you?
Well, I feel like going back to that idea of like who or what do you belong to, right? I feel like we all think we're just in our story,
Hmm.
right? But the truth is our story started in somebody else's story and it'll end in somebody else's story, right? Like, I mean, there's the idea that we're born alone and we die alone, but I don't know that that's always true in that sense. Like I think about like my son, he was a big part of my story,
Hmm.
right? As soon as he happened, he was part of my story, right? And he sees himself as just his own agent, right? Like,
Hmm.
but so I thought it would be interesting to think about like, what if we met someone for the first time when they were in the background of someone else's story, like when they were a little kid just running around and you don't really see their perspective of things. And then, a couple of chapters later, that person comes back and they're grown and they're facing like a similar set of problems to what their grandparents were facing when you first saw them. And you, as the reader, you're thinking about the context of this story and you're remembering the people that preceded this person, and you're like, don't make the same mistake. You're
Yeah.
that, but I don't know. We all kind of fall into that trap, and we all think we're doing everything for the first time until we get to a space where we can look back and be like, oh yeah, this is what my dad was talking about.
Yeah, I love how we see characters we've seen before, or spent a lot of time with to show up again in other characters' stories as we move through time. I mean, how did you decide where to peek into? Because I love so much when they become these kind of side characters and then the impression of them has changed. And yeah.
Yeah, well, this book started as like a failed short story,
Mhm.
right? But I got so enthralled
As
by
all good
like
books do.
yeah, right. Like I don't know, I couldn't make this thing work for anything. I was revising it for years. I had never like written anything else. This was like the one story I was going to try to write to start being
Mm.
a writer. Um and as an exercise, I was like, well, what if I like think about this other character and write their story, right? And I kept doing that. It kept leading me to like other characters and being interested in the other people in this person's life and how they, I don't know, what idiosyncrasies they inherited from like their parents or grandparents, or what they decide to pass on or against their will pass on, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and well, then my follow-up question to that is there's so many, how did you keep it straight? Because my one recommendation is buy this book and read it. But my second recommendation for that is put a post-it note at the family tree in the front because you're gonna want to flip back to it and everything. I just technically, how'd you do that? How'd you do it, man?
Yeah, it's easier when you're writing the book. They all feel I don't know, it didn't feel like such a big undertaking, but I see it now. Right. But I don't know. I feel like and this is back to your earlier question, like what sort of guided me from one character to the next. I kind of just wanted to, like, I had in my mind a couple of situations, and I wanted to see that situation from different angles and see how different people dealt with it. Like even with this beginning chapter, like this, like it's kind of like it's the it's like a retelling of like the prodigal son, right?
Mm,
Except for it's
yeah.
the devil and God is the father, right? And there's a lot of that throughout the book of like people grappling with that relationship among other relationships, right? And thinking about like what if this how would this look if it was different people, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and it's cyclical, and those relationships keep repeating too. That's yeah. So you're telling me there's not like a wall somewhere with string that
There was a post-it note wall.
okay. I knew it.
There was
I
definitely
knew it.
well, yeah, I mean, I feel like for forever my idea was, oh, this is going to be in reverse chronological order. I'm going to start in the present and we're going to work our way back to the past, and that's going to be the thing.
Mm.
And everyone I showed it to was just like, this doesn't work. This doesn't work. And I'm like, no, I'm not there yet. I have to do it. And then I was like, okay, I'm going to organize this by theme. So then it's going to be like these characters are dealing with fire. These characters are dealing with water in this way. Let's like rearrange things that way. And that didn't work either. But I feel like I had to go through those drafts to sort of make to explore what I wanted to explore and then sort of put it in chronological order. Then once
Totally.
that happened, things became easier.
Totally. Tell me about fire and water. What do those mean in the book? Or what does this
Well,
mean to you? Sorry.
well, yeah. I mean, I feel like I was thinking about I kind of saw it as like a progression of elements, right? And it was partly just fueled by this I don't know, this idea of like fire as this sort of destructive force, right? That sort of tears through and sort of feeds on itself and everything in its path. And I remember reading in like one of Zora Neale Hurston's writings that didn't get published until much later, Barracoon,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
He describes as he was kidnapped, like that everything was sort of set on fire, right? And I thought about that image, and I tried to like think about, okay, so the fire was burning, and then each successive chapter it goes down, and then what are we left with? Like then the water enters, and then it evaporates, and so we move from like fire to water to air when someone takes flight, right? So, but that was just sort of like a background architecture. I
Sure.
don't know if you notice it comes up like these are the fire chapters, these are the water chapters, these are the air
I didn't have
chapters.
that in my post-it wall for the book, but yeah. But yeah, yeah. All right, I have one more length question here that I've written about the book, and then I'll move on, I promise. But speaking of that, I love how throughout the book, because we're going through 200 years or almost 200 years here. Um, I love how the characters telling of their ancestors' stories that we know, because especially if you read it really quickly, like, oh, I read this yesterday, right? I know what happened here, but their tellings change over time and how you captured that. Um, and kind of how, on the one hand, they forget what happened. They forget as these stories get passed down, or as the stories become legend and because apocryphal for them. The book kind of becomes about storytelling too. And how was that important to you, or was that something you were working with?
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely what I was thinking about. I mean, in some ways, this book is sort of like imagining my way into the gaps of my own family history,
Mm.
right? I mean, there are a couple of like myths for my family who, like we were all, and I don't know if any of us, no, I was looking around to see if I see familiar faces. I do have family here in Milwaukee somewhere. Yeah. Well, I mean, we started in this small town in West Tennessee, right? But before that, we were on the Acadia plantation in East Tennessee, just north of Knoxville.
Okay.
And like so the furthest back I can go is the ancestors that were born on that plantation,
Hmm.
right? And some sort of way they decided instead of going north like everybody else, they were like, "Oh, let's go further into the south and get some land here." Um, and I don't know why they made that decision, how they bought the land, or like what went into that. So I was trying to think about that. But I also have this great aunt who was very interested in genealogy, and she told me like a couple of versions of this story over the years that I knew her that I tried to like match up. So it's sort of like I there were like two or three myths that were like fundamentally incompatible, and I had no
Hmm.
idea which was the right one. And I can kind of piece together from like some census stuff like, oh, this is kind of probably the one that's the most true, but I don't know. I feel like the way those myths sort of like lived, especially when I was like really little and I didn't know anything but what I was told, right? Like they those things become sort of bigger than life for you. So it was kind of my way to interrogate those.
Yeah, for sure. I think the book also, speaking of interrogating that and continuing to, move south, move further south, continue to buy land and or to continue to sharecrop as characters in the book do and everything post-slavery. Um, I don't know, what did you learn in your research about that versus myth versus what we're told? Um, yeah, because I think it's interesting in the book how character, I don't want to give too much away, but interesting in the book how characters grapple with like what do we do now and staying, you know.
Yeah, no, I mean that's something I thought a lot about, like because the family they have, I mean, various ones sort of leave and come back, and they have the option to go elsewhere. But I don't know. One of the things I wanted to think about was the decision that. So I was born in West Tennessee, so each one of my ancestors successively decided to stay, and I was wondering about like why that is, like why stay in this place with this terrible history, right? Like what's here? But I know I think also the part that gets left out of that is, this is their home. This is
Mm,
where all of their memories of childhood are, where their parents and grandparents were, right? So it's not just about escaping, what's there. It's about just also honoring that and staking your claim and being like, I actually no, this I my ancestors lived and died here, and that means something to me. And this is my experience of the world, and I don't want to give that up for something else,
for
right? So
sure.
I kind of wanted to think about what what that would look like across the generations, and have people grapple with that decision to stay when ostensibly there was better elsewhere.
I think it's really powerful how you grapple with it in the book too. And I think there is a kind of power in an ownership of the history over the place that kind of becomes apparent as time moves through the book too. Yeah, for sure. Um, I can't read my own writing, so bear with me a second here, folks. Um, yeah, I'm sorry. I do like I was flipping through the book, looking at my notes and everything I had noted for myself. And something that comes up a couple times again in the book, it's a repeated theme, is the devil mentioning, not everyone can wait for salvation.
Yeah.
Some people they can't wait for the by and by. We need some saving right now. How did that notion drive you as you were writing the book?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like when I've like a lot of this book, I mean, you can see from the opening that there's a lot of Bible stuff happening. But I feel like, I don't know, the religion I grew up in isn't quite like it was informed by the Bible, but there was this other flavor, right? There was something from somewhere else informing things. And I feel like one of the things that is interesting about particularly like Black Southern religion, the one I grew up in, is it's not transcendent in the way, like it's not like, I feel like it's imminent, right? Everything is sort of happening in the here and now in this way. And so when I was thinking about like what it means to sort of have or to wait for the by and by, right? Because I feel like during slavery that was like a technology of enslavement, right? It was just like, oh no,
Mm-hmm.
you serve your earthly masters, and then after you're going to get your freedom, but you just have to wait. And the point of that is, you never get free on earth, right?
Yeah.
So I feel like there's something like radical in deciding like, no, no, no by and by, here and now, that's what it's going to be, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Can you talk about some of the other, as you put it, flavors in that? Because yes, I grew up in Appalachia, but perhaps shocking to no one here, I didn't grow up in Southern Black churches. So, what other stories, folklore, traditions were built into that? Because you build them into the book as well.
Yeah, right. Well, I mean, like, and this is going back to Zora Neale Hurston. I'm going to talk about her a lot. She wrote in this essay, The Sanctified Church, that the first line of the essay goes like, Negroes aren't nearly as Christianized as y'all think, right? And so
Hmm.
she wholeheartedly believed, like, through her study of folklore and what she understood of West African religion, that like Black Christianity was like sort of like Black English vernacular, where it was like English words, biblical words, but with a West African grammar, right? And so her idea was that figures like like Christ and like the devil in some ways mapped onto West African divinities, and the stories that were sort of told about them, like both in folklore and the way that they were invoked in worship, was sort of like a melding of both, right? Like it wasn't one thing or the other, but sort of both of them there together. Right. So I thought it would be interesting to think about. And I feel like just like how, no two churches are the same, like no two people's belief in one religion is the same, right? Like if you even if all of us said we were one religion, you start talking to people about it, we're going to emphasize and think about different things. So like each of these characters, all like even the ones that don't say or that are sort of, there's some very anti-church characters in here too.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
but even still, they have their own understanding of spirituality and what that means. So like I feel like we all have our own individual religion. And it's only when we come together and think about it that we can take the best of what everyone has to offer, right? But I feel like I sort of wanted everyone's own story to be guided by their own sense of that.
Yeah. Boy, the best of it. Isn't that the dream? Yeah, I love too in the story. It's repeated a couple times. Just the creation story of the river, too. I love how you use that in the book.
Yeah, right. And I feel like that one actually is it has some Native American influence too,
Okay.
right? And one of the characters is adopted by a Native American woman, and he sort of takes that into the family line. So it's like a melding of
Mhm.
all of that too. Like specifically, um, the Chickasaw and Choctaw nations and their notion of like people first arising from specifically the Mississippi River, right? And that sort of melding and having some confluence with, the peoples that grew up along the Niger and their sense of the divinity we now most often think of as Oshun and how she came into being and what she has dominion over. So it's kind of like thinking about like these other belief systems that are operating in the background and they're sort of like in popular culture, right? That we don't necessarily think about the genealogy of. But like even
Mhm.
our sense of who the devil is, like so much of that is like the devil's in the Bible shockingly little for
Yeah.
how much the figure gets evoked. Like I don't even know if he's called I don't know if he has the name Lucifer or devil or any of that. Most of that comes from Milton's Paradise Lost, but it's so in the consciousness that you can't divorce these figures that someone else
Yeah.
dreamed up from like because I remember like specifically looking in the Bible like where is the devil, and it's like in the moments it's debatable like is this the same person,
Mhm.
maybe, I don't know, right? But I feel like we've all sort of accepted this understanding of it right in this way, so it's like just as much cultural as it is religious.
Yeah, yeah, oh, absolutely. I mean, gosh, I think when we picture the devil, like we collectively are seeing like the Benadryl Hat Man as much as like we're seeing any biblical figure,
Right,
right?
yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Absolutely. Speaking of melding too, I think this book is such a wonderful display and way of capturing all the cultures melding. Perhaps not the way the folks who first would say, "Oh, this place is going to be a melting pot," right? It's not the ideal that perhaps was thought of, but it's the reality of it too, and you capture it really well.
Yeah, no, right. Like, I mean, I have a, I don't know. I was studying religions one while, but it's interesting that you say that because I was thinking about like, I don't know if I'm thinking about what part of West Virginia are you from?
The Ohio border,
The
so the
Ohio
boring
border.
part.
Okay. Did you know any churches that did sort of like snake handling?
Oh yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
I feel like that's a very like that's not
It's
you can't trace that back to Europe.
no, no. And they don't like here's the thing about snake handling too. People think like it's like, oh, they're gonna drape it over your shoulders. They reach
No.
in a basket and overhand pitch a rattlesnake at you. And the idea is that if it didn't bite you, the devil didn't get you. Like that's what it is. And I think a lot of folks don't realize there's like violence in those ceremonies. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Like exactly. And I feel like a lot of those practices, like we have these the thing about the South is it's we think of it as two cultures, like there's Southern black culture and there's Southern white culture. But if you look really closely,
Oh.
it's a lot of the same things with different names, right?
Mhm.
Like even like if you look at like country and blues music, it's just like okay, like even the banjo comes from Africa. Banjo's
Yeah.
an African word. Like
Mhm.
bluegrass is just country, and a lot of them have this sort of the same root. So this distinction is kind of like artificial when you think of there's always like this back and forth influence that's really interesting and also too like genetically like we can see that with the new pope, right? Like it was a big deal like oh he has like African ancestry, what's that? And if he hadn't become pope no one would have ever known ever, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
it's like one of those things where I feel like we the divisions we've created in this country for who we are and how we sort of put ourselves apart, they're like really arbitrary when you think about it. And I feel like there's a lot of work that goes into policing those divisions. But if you like look at the material reality of those histories, like it's just like one
It's
thing.
absolutely, absolutely. I couldn't say it. Yeah. I have nothing to add. Perfect. Yeah, absolutely. I want to ask just a couple more little questions. Think of your great questions here while I'm doing this. Um, I read in an article a while back that you like soap operas quite a bit, and there's a lot of love lost, and there's a lot of folks pushing and pulling in this book. Do you want to talk about that, or
Well,
do you want to?
so I feel like the soap operas, Yeah.
Get blown out of proportion.
No. It's just like I feel like they were kind of so. Just to tell Mom, I couldn't. Well, at my launch, she was there sitting in the front row, but now she's there. Like she loved soap operas, and she would like record them during like she was a teacher, and she would record them during the school day, and then like she would play them back like in the afternoons and on weekends. But she wouldn't watch them. She would like turn it on, like she'd
Mm,
press play, and then she'd get up and start doing something else, and then she comes back into the room and rewinds it. So me as a, like a child who doesn't have any like I'm subjected to these soap operas over and over again, like the same scenes I'm
the
seeing.
early questions
I'm
about what
growing up,
is
yeah
here.
yeah I'm growing up with people like I remember like, oh yeah, that's when like Nicholas Cassadine came, like we're like the same age, like I know these people, like they're like in my life forever. But I do feel like it's interesting, like I do feel like that fed my desire to like want to see the whole story of these characters' lives, because like I remember
Yeah.
like there are a couple of characters on like All My Children and General Hospital, like I grew up with them, like, and not just like the characters, the actors. I remember Michael B. Jordan when he was like Erica Kane's stepson on All My Children, like that's my first, and now he's like this huge movie star. You would think, oh, he got to start on something. I was like, yeah, I remember he was bad back then and now he's good.
Mm-hmm.
But but yeah, so I feel like just seeing those stories over and over, I couldn't help but like learn and be interested and also think about like sort of fraught family dynamics. So I will
Yeah.
say that that definitely probably had a influence.
Fair.
Right.
Fair. Yeah. My last question, and then you guys are gonna ask some questions. So a lot of characters. Who was your favorite, and who did you get most angry at while you're writing them?
Oh man, I got that's hard. My favorite character is probably Cassandra. I feel like she like,
Yeah.
and also
She's the
too, I feel like
best.
she was the easiest to write. Like her voice just came. She was like, "This is my story." I'm like, "Great, got it." I probably hated the most Porter.
Really?
Yeah, I
Uh,
he was the terrible short story
mm,
that never
okay, so you're just
got
tired
written.
of him.
Yeah, I was so tired of like we've been in this relationship now for like 15 years,
Mm,
and like it's I yeah. And yeah, I feel like the characters who it's a good tell is if this character's telling their own story, I'm probably a big fan of them. And if it's the third person voice, then maybe not so much.
fair enough. All right. I'm gonna go back through my copy with a pen one more time then. All right. Oh yeah, well, you do spend a lot of time. The characters spend a lot of time with each other. It's really a marvelous book. I can't gush enough about it.
Thank you.
Who has a question? Yes.
Yeah, so at that point, so the devil kind of came, the devil wasn't there from the beginning, right? He sort of entered into this one character story who's sort of kind of like a blues musician in the Robert Johnson tradition, where he's sort of like contending with this devil. And I was so interested in his relationship to that character, I started thinking about the other people. And so the prologue came about like, so at that point I was thinking about the devil's relationship to these other characters and how that could manifest. But I kept writing further and further back in time, right? Like and to both sides of the family tree. So there's like a French side and a West African side of the like root family tree, right? And I was like writing sections about like French boys who were like Huguenots who were then like forced out after like Catholic persecution. Like, and I'm like also in West Africa, like pre-colonial West Africa, trying to imagine. Like when I was like, when am I gonna stop? Um, so I had to think like, when does the story start? And so I kind of started the prologue as a like an exercise, like, okay, if I write things from the very beginning, like this is existence, then I won't feel compelled to tell everything. So I was like, okay, I'll write the beginning and then we
Yeah,
could like
yeah.
move on.
It's it. It's it. It's a lot easier than going backwards through every person that's ever existed.
Yeah, I mean, I was on my way.
Yeah. You had your hand up? Yeah.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Well, so it's sort of kind of all of those things. So it starts with there's this Yoruba proverb, I am because we are, right? And I always thought of that as sort of like the opposite to like the Descartes or Cartesian, like I think, therefore I am. It's like, no, you're not here because you thought. You're here because somebody made you. You're responsible to those people, right? And so, and there's also this sense in like a lot of West African religions that like when people die, they're not like gone. You're only fully gone when there's no one alive to remember your name. As long as someone's alive to speak your name, you're out there, right? And so my sense was that like I was thinking about like what does it mean for this woman who has this deep impression of this woman who was so important to her life there from birth, right? Her sister, but because of the way she was injured when she was captured, she can't remember her own name or her sister's name, but that bond is so strong that she sort of calls her to her without knowing her name. Right. So I thought of that as sort of like, and also too the idea that like when we think about like what I I also have a I when I was this novel also came out of a failed dissertation as well as a failed short story. And I was interested specifically in spirit possession in an American context, specifically in the 20th century and the politics around that, right? So like my idea was that like, you know, during like in slavery, like both in the Caribbean and the US, it was this technology of resistance, right? So I was like, what happened to that after? And the conclusion I came to was when like all other political means fail, this is what sort of gets fall back on. Like when like you appeal to the courts and you protest and then nothing happens, what do? And the answer was
Yeah.
this, right? Um, yeah, and so there's this sense that so in thinking about possession, this we often think about it as there's this idea that there's this entity from somewhere else who is taking control of your body, right? But if you look really closely at how it operates in most West African traditions, it's not necessarily that this entity is coming from somewhere else. There's the idea that like everyone who had an influence in you has some sort of presence in you. And that possession is really just that aspect of them sort of rising to the front. So it's always in you, right? Have you ever had like a moment where you're like, you say something, you're like, oh, that's my dad. Oh, that's my girl. Like that's sort of like that phenomenon, right? Just pitched really high. So it's kind of like that operating.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I didn't want to, I don't know. I just it's so long. I don't know, and you have to do like separate takes, so it's not just like I would just record and then send it off. And I already had read it to my because I was, and I'm hung up on like the sound of the sentences. I probably edited for sound of sentences more than I edited for sense. And so I was always reading these back or like having someone else read it to me or having the computer read it to me. And so I was just like, I can't again. But also too, you know, some of the voices like, I mean, I feel like I can do some of the third person, but like I feel like it grates me when I'm like it's another character. Like I feel like I don't want to read like I love Cassandra's chapters. I don't want to read her out loud. That's not my voice. You know, I want someone else who could maybe do it better. And I think the actress that got to do her did her justice. I was just like, oh yeah, this person, like she can do it. I can't do it. Well, it was their cadence because I feel like no one was ever going to get it exactly how I heard it in my head, which was a painful revelation. But also too, I wanted to see like what can you bring to it that's interesting, right? Like don't like try to force something else onto it, but like how are you in conversation with it in a way? But yeah, I feel like that I kind of did that on purpose. I remember like I when I was maybe halfway through drafting this, I took a poetry class, or I took a couple of poetry classes from some very gifted poets, and the way that they talked about how language works and what it can do had like a serious impact on how I was editing. I'm just like, no, stop here, slow down here, like speed up there, and thinking about how I can get the words to sort of mimic the feeling in that way. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, I was gonna say I don't know a really good writer who doesn't read it to themselves. So yeah, explains a lot. Who's got another one? Come on, go ahead.
And so, like, I see precursors for your novel, like Solitude, 500.
100. Oh yeah. I saw like half of the first season. Yes, I did see that. Yeah, no. Definitely everything Zora Neale Hurston wrote that I got my hands on before reading this. I mean, before writing this. Toni Morrison's Song of Solomon. I feel like, I mean, that's the only reason this character's named Porter, because of it's named after Porter from Song of Solomon. But I remember when I first read that book, no one had ever. So I grew up. I think I grew up in a really small town, West Tennessee. Like the road I grew up on was named Fayne Road, and the next road, the intersection, is Fayne Lane. Like that's how small and how much of my family was there, right? And when I read Song of Solomon and she got to Shalimar, and I was like, I'd never seen my experience in a book in that way. Similar to how like when I read Zora Neale Hurston, I'd never like heard like the way that like the people I knew talked. I didn't know it could be, which I didn't know it could be literature, right? And so I feel like when I read that book, that's when I first was just like, oh man, I want to write something. Like that was when the ache kind of started, So I would say definitely Song of Solomon. Yeah.
All right, one more. We'll make it a quick one.
Retribution, or did you write so that people could understand the devil's perspective? Like, because it's always two sides to the story. So we all know how the devil was kicked out there. So was it to be written to say, look, he has a story to tell too. Like he has, you know, something happened with him too. Like it's not just a one-sided thing. Or did you write it in the perspective of um, African American retribution? Like, well, this is how African Americans use this.
Yeah, it's kind of both intertwined, right? So like I don't know, thinking about like the history of religion in this country, like when we think about like there was a point at which a decision was made where they said that we want everyone who is enslaved to be Christian. And it was purposeful, right? Because before everyone was practicing doing it, as long as you do your work, I don't care what you do. Just do your work and keep doing it, right? But then the Haitian Revolution happens, right? And they see what happens when people sort of like band together under a religion to which the slave owners didn't have control over, right? And so there was a lot of fear about like what would happen if you let these people continue to practice the religion they came here with, right? So there was then a huge push. Like that's when you see like parts of the Bible being emphasized, like, oh, you have to like serve your masters and do this, right? Like so, and then conversely, everything that wasn't Christian came to be associated with the devil, right? It's like, oh, that's not in the Bible, that's hoodoo, right? You're not singing gospel it's the blues, that's the devil's music, right? So they became sort of like two sides of the same coin, to where it became like everything that was associated with non-Abrahamic religions became in some sort of way like in the camp of the devil, and some sort of way. So sort of just kind of like taking that and running with it.
Yeah. Well, thank you. We're all pretty glad you did take that and ran with it in this book. I tell you what, this is an incredible, powerful, wonderful, wonderful, wonderful book. I see a lot of you with copies in your hands. I see a couple with multiple, so all right. But if you don't yet have multiple copies of it in your hands, I suggest you go fix that. Go visit our front desk. That's a desk-looking thing at the front. One of my colleagues will sell you a copy. I'm going to usher Rickey up this way where he'll sign some books. Before I do that, I want to say thank you all so much for being here. We wouldn't have a bookstore without you, and I hope we see you all at another event soon. Have a great night. And thank you, please.
Thank you.